Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. If you have a Ford Explorer or a Ford Edge that has a 3.5 liter engine or a 3.7 liter engine and the water pump just went out on it, and when you called your local auto repair shop they quoted you anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000, and at that point you probably wonder why so much, it's just a water pump. And it's possible that you could have called the dealership. Now the dealership probably quoted you $2,500, so that got even worse. And at that point you're wondering, what in the world is it so much? Well, you're about to find out, because I'm going to show you why replacing this water pump on this type of vehicle is so expensive. So I'm going to bring the camera up close so you can see why replacing this pump is so expensive, and I'll go ahead and I'll mention the steps in case you want to do it yourself, but you need to be relatively skilled to do this kind of job. If you don't have enough tools or your skill level is very low, just bite the bullet and pay the amount. But let's take a peek. Here's how the engine compartment looks like once all the items that need to be removed have been removed to be able to get to this water pump. I'll show you where this water pump is. We're going to look at it from the passenger side after the plastic wheel well has been removed. So here's the brand new water pump that I already installed. Right here. Just like I said at the intro of the video, I'm going to outline the steps needed to get to this water pump and to replace it in case you want to do it yourself. But just remember, you have to have the skill. So let's do it. So first item that needs to be removed is your intake plenum. And of course you need to disconnect all the electrical connections. Disconnect this hose. Loosen these bolts, they don't come off, but you need to loosen them all the way. There's another bolt right here. And hidden underneath, you're going to find this bolt right here. So don't be prying on this plenum before you remove that bolt, otherwise you're going to break it. So once you disconnected everything, here's your other bolt right here. This one right here. So once everything is disconnected, obviously pull it off. And then once you do, cover the intake plenum with tape or anything you want, even shop towels in the cavities, so no dirt enters, because if dirt enters the engine, it can cause the valves not to seat properly and develop a misfire due to no compression or low compression. So that's your first item, your intake plenum. So once the plenum has been removed, next step is to remove the valve covers. So start with the front, remove these bolts, remove the 3 coils. You're going to have to detach the harness that is fastened to some of the studs. You're going to pull them out. Let me show you. You're going to have several of these that slide into the studs, and you have to pull them out. Now, if some of them are so stuck that you cannot pull them out, here's what you're going to have to do. So if you cannot slide them out when they're still attached to the harness, you're going to have to cut them like that so you can slide the harness away. And obviously you're going to have to buy new ones because you need to fasten the harness back in place. And once the harness is out of the way, then you can use pliers to pull them out away from the stud. So try to pull them out first. Pull in from here, don't pull from the wires because you can damage them. You have to pull from the actual clip, the retainer. But if you're having problems, like I said, then just cut them and buy new ones and install new ones back on. So there are a few around it, around the valve covers. So once you clear all the wiring harness and you have all these bolts loosened up, you're going to pry the valve cover away from the cylinder head. What you're going to find is that these valve covers are really stuck on. Slide a small screwdriver on the edges and start prying around it. Very gently, very slow. You do not want to break this plastic valve cover. And as you go around, it'll start detaching. And once it's free, then just pull it out and remove it. And this is what it's going to look like. And proceed to do the same with the other valve cover, which is right there. And this is what it's going to look like once it's removed. Next step, remove the fuel line. Be very gently with this plastic clip so you don't break it when you slide this out. And on this end, you're going to need a fuel line disconnect tool, just like replacing a fuel filter on a Ford. Place a clean drain pan under the vehicle, remove the drain plug, and drain the engine oil. Next step, place a clean drain pan under the radiator, passenger front side, loosen the drain plug, and drain all the coolant. Loosening the cap will make the coolant drain faster, and once the coolant has been drained, what you're going to do, you're going to disconnect this coolant hose right here. So for this step, just imagine that this cover is still attached to the engine. Loosen the tension from the belt and remove it, but make sure that you have the diagram so you can put it back on correctly. Next, remove these 3 bolts and remove the tensioner. The next step is going to be removing the harmonic balancer. I'm going to show you how. First step is going to be to remove the crankshaft center bolt, 18mm socket. So remove that, and then just imagine the cover is still here, the harmonic balancer is still here. So you use a smaller bolt that doesn't thread into the threads, just so you can have this to support the puller. So using a 3-jaw puller like this one, attach it like that, and as you thread this in, it's going to pull the harmonic balancer out. So that's where you're at right now. You have the harmonic balancer removed. Next step, cut a 2x6 that is slightly wider than the oil pan so it supports it, and then using your floor jack at first, just put pressure. Don't try to lift yet, just put pressure so it's supporting it. What I have going on right now, I have this piece of wood holding the jack because it's positioned with the floor of the garage, so the jack doesn't come down. But this step you don't need to be at just yet. All you need to worry about is cutting a piece of wood that's going to support the oil pan, just like your floor jack, and you raise it up to where it's putting a little bit of pressure. Remember, you have pressure under the engine, and for illustration purposes, the cover is still in place. I know it's not, but just have some imagination. So next step, you're going to remove the 4 nuts that hold the mount to the cover, and they're very long studs. I have 2 studs removed, and you'll know why in a little bit, but this is how long they are, so you need very deep sockets. So remove all 4. Next, use an 18mm socket, remove the 3 bolts. I just put 2 just so you can keep it in place, and remove the mount. And remember, when you remove the mount, the weight of the engine is going to be on the jack now. So make sure that your jack is in good condition and it doesn't go down. If you had to put a piece of wood to support it like I did, for safety, that's even better. Is to remove all the bolts to fasten the cover in place. Keep them organized so you can put them back on in the original location. And make sure that you remove this one before you start prying on the cover. It's kind of hidden. To be able to remove these bolts right here, you're going to have to remove these studs with an E8 socket, and then these bolts will come off. Also, this bolt right here, you won't be able to get it all the way out because you have the body of the vehicle. So as long as you loosen it all the way, it'll just come out with the cover. And of course, you're going to have to slide it in before sliding the cover in place, otherwise guess what? You won't be able to put it back on. Once all the bolts are removed, pry on the cover gently all the way around, either with a flat screwdriver or a small flat chisel, whatever you want to do, but slowly do it until it comes loose. And once it comes loose, you're going to have to lift the engine up a little bit using your floor jack. And this is so the cover can clear the facers, the chains, and this edge right here. So you're going to lift it up a little bit and slide the cover out of the way, and this is how it's going to look like once the cover is out of the way. Before removing the chains, use a thick washer and use the crankshaft center bolt to rotate the engine clockwise, slowly, and make sure that the alignment marks on the cam facers are facing up. Use paint, just like I did here, to paint the relationship of the facer and the chain on both sides. So you can see that side, and paint it on the dot and the chain on the crankshaft, just like that. To avoid the need to buy a cam holding tool, you can use a 7/8 wrench on the cam like that, position it like this, and using either a small piece of rope or shoelaces like I did, you're going to guide it through here. Now don't do it on the solenoid, do it on the bracket and fasten it so it's tight. See how it's against it right here? It's perfect. And all it is a 7/8 wrench. So this will keep the cam from turning. You don't need to worry about this one because the chain is attached to this one. So as long as you hold this cam, then it's not going anywhere, and then you're not going to be fighting it when it's time to put it back together and be all frustrated and mad and most likely causing up a storm. I know I would. So to avoid all that, just do yourself a favor, do this on both sides. Your cams may move very little if you don't time very tight, but they're not going to all of a sudden go all over the place and your timing marks are completely wrong, and as I said, you'll be all mad and frustrated. So do that on both sides. So the next step is to remove the timing chain guides, but before that you're going to remove the tensioner. So remove these bolts and remove the tensioner. Once you have removed the tensioner, you can slide this guide out because it's not held by any bolts, it just slides into that pin up there. After that, remove the two retaining bolts that you see and remove this guide. This one right here, there's the bolt down below right there. Hard to see, but you just feel it. They're all 8mm, by the way. And then remove the bolt and remove this guide. Now this one right here is a bit hard. The bolt, you're not going to be able to take it all the way out. To loosen this bolt, you're going to have to use a wrench. You can't get a socket in there because of the sprocket. So loosen it up. You're not going to be able to loosen it up all the way because it's going to make contact with the sprocket. So just when it's closed, then this guide is just going to slide out enough for you to remove the pump. You can detach the lower end from the crankshaft sprocket so you can have enough slack to move it around, and then just kind of keep it in place. It's not going to be aligned. This one is not going to be aligned when you're doing all this. You're going to be moving it, but just keep this one, at least one. So no need to remove the chain all the way. Just do yourself a favor, keep it there so it's easier to put it all back together. So now you have enough space. Remove all the bolts from the water pump. Show you. So here you can see how many. So remove them all, keep them organized, so you put them back in their original location, and then once you do, gently pry on the pump, and just so you know, there's going to be coolant leaking out. If you can put like an old t-shirt in here so it soaks some of it and it doesn't go into the oil pan, that'll be better, because as you remove the pump, it's going to leak coolant, as I said. So back to the pump, you pry it, and then you just slide it out. And then remember, you have this other guide over here that is going to be a little bit tricky. So you're going to very carefully, just work it out of there. And it comes out. I mean, here's this one. And just pull it out. So if you're curious of how come when these water pumps leak, they don't leak into the engine oil, well, at least they thought about that when they designed the darn thing. If you see this right here, on a regular pump, as you know, when they go bad, the weep hole is right there, so they just leak out. And that's how you know that is your water pump. And this darn thing, I'm going to show you where it starts leaking first, and then I'll go back to this. So in this engine design, you're going to see the coolant leaking in between the AC compressor and the engine. You're going to see the coolant leaking right there. And as you look around, you will see that there are no radiator hoses anywhere near, so the coolant is coming from the engine, from the side of the engine. So let's go back to the pump and how they designed it. So instead of leaking out, it goes through this channel, and then from here it goes into another cavity from the block that is going to allow it to leak out, and that's where you're going to see it coming out, right in between the alternator and the AC compressor, and that's where you're going to see all this coolant leaking out when this pump goes bad. So just giving you heads up, that is what is bad when you see coolant leaking from that location. So now you have the water pump out, and since a new one is on, I'm going to have to show you on this one. Make sure you clean the mounting surface on the engine, and then install the new gasket on the new pump. Make sure that it's tight. If you have to put like petroleum jelly on the cavity so it doesn't come off, then do it, because you don't want to leak. And very gently slide the new one in place and install all the bolts. Make sure you tighten to the proper specs, look them up. And as you can imagine, once you have installed the new pump, you're going to have to make sure that your timing marks are aligned and got your chains in place. So you got your timing marks where they should be, and you start installing the guides back on. The last thing you're going to install is the tensioner. So obviously this tensioner is already installed, but to be able to install it, you're going to have to compress the plunger using a vise. In order not to damage this part that has the teeth when you're compressing this tensioner using a vise, you're going to have to insert a small screwdriver so you can move it up a little bit and very gently compress it, like I said, with a vise, and then keep doing it until you can see the cavity, and you can insert something like this that can keep the plunger from wanting to come out. Just keep looking in there with a light, you'll see the orifice, and this will go all the way through. And once you have done this, this is slightly more compressed than what you see right now. You put the bolts on, and once it's all in place, then remove this and the plunger will extend. If you don't want it to slam against the guide, put a little bit of pressure on the guide as you remove this, but one way or another it'll extend and it'll keep pressure on that. And of course you already made sure that all the timing marks were aligned. Make sure that you lubricate the gears of the new water pump with new engine oil before putting the timing cover back on. Remove your wrenches, and then you're back where we started, right here. And don't forget, this is a good opportunity to replace the spark plugs, especially because in order to replace the rear ones, you have to remove the intake plenum. So it's already removed, may as well do it. So up to this point, all the hard part has been done. The old pump has been removed, the new pump's been installed, the timing chain has been installed back on with the timing marks aligned. Now, one thing I didn't mention because it did not apply to this engine is when you're removing the guides, if they show wear, guess what? You're going to have to install new guides and most likely new chain when you're doing this. The reason why I didn't replace the guides and the chain in this engine is because it has low mileage, and the water pump was not supposed to leak at such a low mileage. But it is what it is. Here's where I'm at. So now you're learning what it takes to do it. So from here on, all you need to do is install everything back on. Make sure that you install new gaskets, new seals, and on the timing cover there is not a gasket, it's just sealant. Make sure you put sealant on both ends, the cover and the engine, kind of light coat them both. That way when you install it on, both of them are a little bit tacky and it seals properly. And remember, make sure that you use a harmonic balancer installer to install the harmonic balancer back on, because if you use the bolt to install it, you run the risk of stripping the threads on the crankshaft, and then you really have problems. So use an installer just like this one. And go ahead and look up the torque specs online, that way you can torque everything to the proper specs. And if you're wondering how come I didn't show you every single plug, every single bolt as I was taking everything apart, is because for one, this job is too involved and too long. It would have taken me too long, too tedious. That's one of the reasons. The other reason, this job, as you can see, can only be done by someone that has good mechanical skills. So they don't need that much involvement. They don't need their hand held, basically. So those are the two reasons. So by now, if you have good mechanical skills, you already know what it takes, and you can decide whether you're going to do it or not. And at the same time, if your mechanical skills are not that good and you see what it takes, just like I said at the beginning of the video, bite the bullet, pay the amount, pay your shop, pay the dealership, and just request that they do everything correctly, so it's only done once and you can move on and start driving your vehicle again. And that's what it takes to replace the water pump on a 3.5 liter or 3.7 liter Ford Explorer or Ford Edge.